You're watching TelecomTV for Mobile World Congress 2018 in Barcelona. And welcome to our panel discussion in association with IBC on how 5G, the trials of 5G at some of the major sporting events this year, such as the Olympics and the forthcoming World Cup, may well shape the future of live TV distribution. And joining me to address these issues, on my immediate left, I have Jeff Nathanson of Whistle Sports. Next to Jeff is Mansour Hanif, BT.
Hi.
And next to Mansour, we have Tom Morad of IHS Markit. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Mansour, maybe I could start with you as a regular in the mobile and telecoms space. How important are these big, high-profile sporting events such as the games and the World Cup as technology showcases?
I think they're actually very important because while most of what you see there are still kind of demo or pre-commercial technologies, they actually have a strong role in accelerating the commercialization of those. So, for example, in Korea, the Olympics, I think it could have had an impact of up to 6 months in terms of getting the technology ready, just by the energy and the focus and the investment that goes into getting ready for that, and the attention it gets from the media. So that's really good. If it's accelerating the availability of those technologies, it's quite important.
And Tom, what are we seeing in the market as a result of these live events and the innovation? Is it important?
Live events are, as Mansour said, live events are very important because they drive the market forward. They're technically more difficult than a lot of other things that are running over networks, and so they test the boundaries of the network capabilities. They have a very established business model. There's a lot of money that flows through live sports, so it also there's incentive to get things right and to try things out. So yes, they are important. Is the short answer.
And Jeff, not only are you a content producer, but you're especially a sports producer. What's your view?
Well, I think the thing is if you look at this, the reason you do something like this is we look at the Olympics and it's a big consumer event. It's the biggest TV sports event of the season, but it's also an industry gathering, much like Mobile World Congress, where the entire sports industry is in one place at one time. You have all the major terrestrial broadcasters. You have many of the major brands there. You have a lot of the sports federations, and this will be a chance of getting the business. It's almost a B2B marketing strategy as much as it is to begin to get awareness amongst the consumers.
And in terms of 5G specifically, we've just had the conclusion of the Winter Olympics. Has the use of 5G, because it's only just been standardized in its first iteration, has the use of 5G there really been on a limited pilot scale? I mean, how much of this is applicable on probably a wider, more commercial footing?
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. The new radio has just been standardized 2 months ago. So I think some of the equipment that was out there is based on that standard. So it is getting very close to 5G. I would still call it pre-commercial 5G or pre-5G, but very, very close to the commercial one. And in terms of scale, it was a reasonable size. From what I heard, there was quite a wide area coverage there. And depending on which operator, there was 2 or 3 operators operating there. It was up to 20, 25 base stations, so they were covering a lot of the routes. So I would call that a good size trial scenario.
And Tom, we've been seeing a lot of interesting things with different camera angles and stitching images together and trying to use augmented reality as well. Has that been successful so far? Are we getting encouraging signs in the wider industry?
Successful's probably overstating it. It's difficult to say that a new technology like virtual reality, for example, is successful when it's in trial runs as it is. We're far from mass market with most of these things, but technically there are lots of interesting things that have been tried out. The grammar for producing live events, live sports, is very different as you go from a small 2D image to basically anything else, including larger format screens, higher resolution. Certainly when you go to virtual reality or augmented reality, it's a completely different grammar, and so you have to produce the content from scratch and learn how to do that. So
yeah, and Jeff, I'm thinking, is this more of there's obviously opportunities here, lots of opportunity, creative opportunities, but I guess also there's a heck of a lot of challenges in this.
Well, I think the opportunities are enormous. I mean, especially when you look at from user-generated content and the fact that the way that people will it's not just how the broadcasters will work in this space and use it, it's how fans themselves will be able to share their experience with their friends back home. And we all know that, with the added functionality within social of much more live streaming and et cetera, that people are going to be wanting to send much more information on their own as personal creators from these locations. And when you have so many people in one place at one time, it can't, to be quite honest, the technology can't quite come soon enough. Because again, everyone hates when they're at the most amazing event of their life and they want to share it with all their friends, and they're dealing with congestion or they're dealing with any number of potential issues that hopefully the next generation of technology will improve or at least fix it.
I mean, Mansour, we've been talking in this industry about LTE's use in arena situations, and there's been a lot of trials, not just sports but music as well. Yet we haven't actually seen it really go into full commercial use. What's been the limiting factor so far, would you say?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, we've actually done a lot. I mean, we use Wembley Stadium as our flagship. It's a great showcase. It's our mothership of our network, we call it. So we use it to test all new technologies. Some of that goes into commercial, some of that stays in the showcase. In terms of LTE broadcast, what's really happened is that the network's still capable of managing the video that's going out there. So it is being rolled out in pilot areas, but hasn't been on a big scale yet. With 5G, I think we'll see also take up for these new technologies in the stadium scenarios first. I think it's going to be a modular rollout as the macro 5G rollouts get out there. But if you look at the production space, and in BT Sport in particular has done a lot of work on VR, AR, 360. The 360 video capabilities that gives a lot of choice to the consumer at home are really powerful here. So that's a combination of edge computing and broadcast. So giving more choice to the consumer of how they actually use that technology is happening now. So it's going to be a smooth transition from the 4G technologies using edge broadcast into the 5G world, where you get more throughput, less latency, etc.
Tom, I'm interested. Are we able yet to sort of predict the take-up of where this might be going? Are we able to sort of?
That's my entire industry and career. So
yeah. It's very difficult, question. But is there enough support around the wider ecosystem?
So there are good stories about what seems like a likely outcome or directionally where we're heading, but that's not necessarily the same as saying this is the prediction of the future. There's no single prediction of the future that is going to be correct, and I'm an analyst saying that. So, but there are a lot of good stories about how things are evolving. We're talking about two very different and very interesting topics. Live sports and video content, and more complicated production around the most complicated types of content. That's one issue. 5G network technology and the development of that is a different issue, and they just interlace and interlock in different opportunities. And we can talk about 5G being used to transmit, let's say, some kind of virtual reality environment that's associated with sports, and that could be a distribution technology. You can also use it as, in stadium, as Mansour was saying, in stadium capture of content, something that's more interactive in the course of a game, or using social, and that's almost that's the other end of the experience, I suppose. So interacting with the content or consuming the content. Different types of grammar, so we have a lot of potential overlaps of those two different worlds.
I'm just curious to know. One of the things I'm curious when I think about the 5G technology in the sports on location at sports events is, what does this impact in terms of the value of live sports rights as we see improvement in terms of camera qualities and the ability to share via live streaming? I'm wondering, one of the things that might pop up as a massive issue is whether, if everyone's camera is capable of a live stream of high definition, high quality video, what does that mean for the sports rights business, and how do we deal with that? Is that considered, does it diminish the value of the sports rights?
That's a really good point, and actually one of the reasons why we haven't rolled out some of those technologies in Wembley in the UK is for the rights issue. Because, well, on the one hand, if it's football, for example, the FA doesn't really want people looking at the screens during the match. And in football, you only got two halves, and you got 15 minutes at half-time. So before the match and at half-time is when we want people to use it, in the UK at least. if you look at other sports like athletics, for example, in a big stadium where there's many things happening in parallel, and you want to see your country's athletes in the same time, that's where I think you can actually give a lot more value. Or Formula One, you heard from Fernando Alonso yesterday. Those kind of things, we can really enhance it. But in terms of rights, the other issue we've had is that if you're filming during an event, you're not allowed, you don't have the rights to broadcast that. So if a user does fantastic quality filming during an event, somebody needs to sign off the rights area. Well, what I think is interesting is, with blockchain, for example, you can actually have a digital rights management system for users, linked in with 5G and a virtualized platform, and potentially you could then have a brokering system where whoever owns the rights could actually allow certain of the filmed content to be distributed on a wider scale. Before that would have to be manual with contract, just not possible. Now, with blockchain and 5G coming together in virtualized platforms, that's going to be really interesting to see. Does anybody actually allow that to happen and distribute those user-made films?
That's really interesting. That's I didn't think about it. And it creates a whole unique experience for the user as well, or the viewer from home seeing it from all different perspectives. I don't think the FA will be able to contain people's usage during the event. I don't think that they'll be able to stop people from accessing their phones. I think that's asking a bit much of people.
Or it's asking a lot of on the telecom side, because you have to constrain a lot of network usage, or to do a lot of DPI and prevent certain types of content coming out. Taking it purely from a legal and rights management perspective, it's going to be difficult to police it. So it's a technical. The best way is probably going to be a technical solution, and that's
adding a lot more technology. A lot is going to depend on the platforms and their willingness to play ball with this. And it's about really trying to, because they have created the technology to detect what's being uploaded or streamed live on their platforms in real time. And so there's going to have to be some conversations. But I like that solution very much.
That is, for blockchain technologies, that's the one I've heard of as the biggest use case after financial, because it's just perfect for managing digital rights. So. You're right, it can be done manually, but with 5G blockchain and virtualized networks, potentially somebody could actually allow those customers to have access, but also to monetize their filming of the rights, potentially, in the future.
I think one of the real interesting things about this in the testing in the live sports is you tested the Olympics, and it's the biggest live sport out there, right? And so they've got all the satellite trucks, they got everything in place. But what's really interesting, what the technology means for smaller sporting events, which you want to go live with, and the capability of being able to create the necessary high quality, high definition infrastructure using the 5G network without having to pay all that money.
That's a great point. And when I was at the IBC in Amsterdam this year, I went and had a look at our trucks there. So BT has got, I think, 24 satellite trucks, and they're varied. So some of them are really, really high throughput. Some of them are 10 gig streams, multi-stream, satellite plus terrestrial. Then you got the lower end ones. But again, if you've got 24 trucks or 30 trucks, you need to position them in certain places. What if you had 150 trucks or truck capable 5G cameras? That means, to your point, you could actually expand the reach of live sports. And I think that's going to be tremendous, because one of the things we're doing in BT Labs with the BT Sport team and media broadcast is effectively enabling the outside broadcast through 5G cameras. And again, it's more for the kind of the lower end trucks today. We don't want to replace those trucks necessarily, but we want to expand the reach so we can actually do thousands of events in parallel around the country. And that's another area that you can actually transform the user experience of consuming that.
So we've been here talking a lot about the technology and how 5G can assist. It seems to me that the pace of technological change has far out surpassed the business of sports, or the whole rights issue and the business models. So is it a case now of actually it's those models that need to be changed? It's not the technology that's holding back a lot of this innovation. We can prove it, we tested it, we piloted it. We need more wholesale change at a business level, business thinking.
Our business is predicated on the fact that the sports industry has to change enormously. We're seeing diminished viewership of television sports, live sports viewing by young people globally. It's going down as well. And so we have to find different ways of we have to function from the premise of how do we create community around our sport, and then tell them about the exciting events coming up. So while we sit there and say, maybe there's some diminishment in terms of live sports viewing in the traditional sense, there was a massive boxing match with 21 million people watching, two amateur boxers, KSI and Joe Weller, go at each other because they were well-known YouTubers. So what you're seeing is there's interest in sports, but we can't take for granted that the existing models will continue to function. And we have to find new ways of getting young people excited about sport and involved in sport, and wanting to go out and participate in live events. And so, I mean, I think I would expect that the experimentation doesn't just come in terms of technological innovation, but equally in storytelling. You can't just assume that someone's going to go watch a live sport because it's on television. I do it, but I'm old, and I grew up watching television, and I love watching cricket on the sofa. But I can't expect the same thing of my 15-year-old son, and so you got to tell him why he needs to be paying attention. And he's got to be much more involved. He can't just sit there and say, there's live sport on the TV tonight, you're going to watch it. I'll do that, but the next generation of fans is not going to do that.
Every generation has tends towards some kind of different narrative or medium, and sports is a basically reality TV in some format. And there's a lot of evidence that there's not a huge decline in interest in linear real-time viewing of things. It's just that maybe certain particular sports will decline in viewership. So that's just natural. Different generations have different interests. My parents didn't grow up watching esports, watching people playing video games live, but now that's a huge industry in itself. So it replaces the type of storytelling that people are interested in.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we could talk about this a lot longer, but for now, Tom, Mansour and Jeff, thank you all for joining us.